Okay, well, you may have noticed that this week was kind of crazy in the news. So I'm going to title this one Saturation Point 2.0 because there was really a lot of things going on. And most weeks I'm scrambling, and this week I was really scrambling to get everything organized and try to get it into a coherent thing. It's pretty clear from everything that's going on that the United States and the world is very divided. The Bible talks about the fact that in the end times there will be wars and rumors of wars. And everywhere I looked this week, it seemed like there was another rumor of war or a war being planned, whether it was in Israel, with Iran and in Syria, it was Gaza, it was Cameroon, it was China and Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. It is really, as this title I've been using for many years now from Foreign Policy, a world disrupted. And people will want it to be fixed. There are some things, though, that this week are very I'm disturbed by them, but it doesn't make me stay in bed all day. I still get up and go to work. I still do things. There's still people that need to be told about the gospel and that sort of thing. Just a reminder, in 3 weeks, I'll be at the Moriel Conference in Swanwick, Alfreton, England, and I'm sure I'll be told exactly how to pronounce that. By the way, so that'll be in 2 weeks, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning. So pray for us for safe travel and good opportunity, and we look forward to meeting all the people over there, and pray that they will get a clue about iced tea before we get there. When we were in England, in Israel last year, we went and saw some friends who were from England, and they said, "What do you want to drink?" And I said, "Do you have any iced tea?" And he was, why would you do that to tea? And like, why wouldn't you? And I always love it. Could I have some ice with that in Israel or other places? And you get, like one cube that's half melted in the bottom, and a warm Coke to go with it or something. And America is the land of ice. Crushed ice, and especially when it's crushed the right way, it gets really, really cold because never mind. It's quite a wonderful thing. Okay, so I thought I'd start off with a little humorous thing about this, how you read scripture and that type of thing is very important. So this is Abraham and Isaac. Isaac says, "Here's the wood for the sacrifice, Dad." Abraham, groovy. "Here's the dagger for the sacrifice, Dad." Abraham, keen. Then Isaac's looking around. "Where's the sacrifice?" Isaac says. "God will provide, Isaac." "Wait, did you say God will provide Isaac or God will provide Isaac?" "Come here, son. I ain't budging until you put in a comma." And that is very often, if you participate in some of these Bible discussions on Facebook and that type of thing, punctuation is very important. Unfortunately, the Greek text doesn't have any, and so it doesn't even have verse and chapter divisions, and neither does the Hebrew, so it's very difficult to break that up. So this is, commas can mean a lot. Every jot and tittle is important. I say that seeing at least one English teacher sitting here looking at me. 2 Timothy chapter 3, "This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to knowledge of the truth. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, we're also told that there will be a time when men will fall away and they will give themselves over to fables. I'll talk a little bit about that today because we have quite a few examples of that. And I used this verse last week. I'll use it again this week. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. It is a mixed up world in many respects. A friend sent me this on Amazon, from Amazon, shopping site. And I'm not going to use his name because he's already in trouble with people because he posted something similar to this. And they want to kick him off a board or whatever that he's on. This is in, well, I won't say where it is, but they want to get rid of him because he holds views that aren't necessarily mainstream. But this is part of what I'm talking about. Here is the t-shirt. There are more than two genders. Okay? And you see the sizing chart to the right? It comes in women's and men's sizes. And also kids. So, okay, does there seem to be a bit of cognitive dissonance going on there? It's actually happening in our government. Here's headlines and stories from the newspapers this week. Trump may limit how government defines one's sex. Gender listed at birth. A threat, this is from the New York Times, a threat to protections of those who identify as transgender. The big front page, full page inside New York Times. At rallies and online, transgender people say they pound won't be erased. Policy change. Let states skirt Health Act basics. See, what happened under the Obama administration, and this is from the LA Times, transgender advocates decry identity proposal. Administration debating changes to transgender rights. The LA Times talks about it's a narrow definition of gender. And here's a protest. You can imagine what the letters preceded the K in the lower left-hand corner were. The system, CIS, which means, I guess, you're pro-heterosexual. The future isn't binary. Protect trans kids. See, what happened under the Obama administration, there are discrimination laws, and they talk about you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex. Now, when that law was written, everybody knew what they meant. You can't discriminate against women because they're women or men because they're men. That's what it meant. What the Obama administration did, without getting it passed by Congress or anything, they said, well, we're going to interpret that to mean transgender and sexual orientation and all sorts of things, which was never the intent. And there have been case laws, there were even some cases decided down in Texas, at least one that said, Obama administration, you can't do that. But that didn't make any difference to the Obama administration because they were going to do what they wanted. They were going to change the law. Even though there's a way to change the law, you go and get Congress to change the law. But they didn't do that. And so now Trump has come in and said, well, we're just going to stick with the definition. So here's what the article says. Sex means a person's status as a male or female based on immutable biological traits identifiable by birth. This is the memo that's going around. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate, as originally issued, shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence. Now, that sounds like a fairly solid definition that's rooted in science. And so it's supposedly you people who believe that there's a male and female, you're the ones who are anti-science. And again, this is a situation where they're projecting onto you. They're really the anti-science ones. Under the proposal leaked to the Times, this is from the New York Times article, disputes about someone's gender could be clarified with genetic testing. That's not satisfactory. Dr. Amy Weimer, a primary care physician and the founder of UCLA's Gender Health Program, questioned the accuracy of a test like that, noting that gender is affected by a number of factors other than DNA. She said, quote, "The short answer is there's not a genetic test that can reliably predict a person's gender. If this comes to fruition, the word I would use is catastrophic." And I'm the fearmonger. Or you're the fearmongers. And this is where we're at in our culture, is we can't even agree on the basics. There are, I don't even have time to share with you the articles that I read this week. In Sweden, I believe, and elsewhere, professors who have advocated studying what happens when they do sex reassignment surgery, they are being denied the opportunity to do those. Because what they are noticing is that suicide rates among people on whom they do sex reassignment surgery are 19 or 20 times higher than the general population. And so they're the ones, though, that advocate this and that push their kids into this at a very young age. They're the loving, caring ones. And I would submit to you that the blood of everyone who commits suicide that struggles with that, and there are people that really do struggle with that, the blood of those people is on the heads of the people that push this nonsense. You may have noticed this week that there's a lot of arguments going on. It's hard to even determine what's real. And so people in New York and elsewhere, boy, it's a shame that conservatives are so divisive with their language. They're fomenting violence and that sort of thing. This was what somebody put on trash cans in New York City and Midtown Manhattan. Keep New York City trash free. A man with a Make a Great America hat on and a Chick-fil-A drink and a Confederate tattoo and a lady holding a Bible. In other words, that's trash. And yet they will accuse others of using inflammatory rhetoric. This goes back a lot. I dug this out of a prior presentation that I did. This is a report issued by the Department of Homeland Security in 2009. It was actually in April of 2009, literally 6 or 7 weeks after the Obama administration was in office. And it was an assessment that was done for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security titled Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgence as Radicalization and Recruitment. Now, in the past, there had been studies done on left-wing extremism under the Bush administration, especially after 9/11, and other types of extremism. But in those cases, the extremists were all identified. And I saw a guy, he was on MSNBC the other night, the guy who wrote this, defending it and saying, oh, my language, everything I wrote was taken out of context by these crazy conservatives who said that I was against them, and I really wasn't against them. They just took it out of context. So let's read what he wrote, okay? So here it is, page 2, down at the bottom. It says this: right-wing extremism in the United States can be broadly divided into those groups, movements, and adherents that are primarily hate-oriented, based on hatred of particular religious, racial, or ethnic groups, and those that are mainly anti-government, rejecting federal authority in favor of state or local authority, Who would that include? A lot of conservatives, or rejecting government authority entirely. It may include groups and individuals that are dedicated to a single issue, such as opposition to abortion or immigration. And this man who wrote this had the audacity to go on in the context of what was going on this week and say, my words were taken out of context. Words mean things. Here's another, page 3. Right-wing extremists are harnessing this historical election, this was the election of Barack Obama, as a recruitment tool. Many right-wing extremists are antagonistic toward the new presidential administration and its perceived stance on a range of issues, including immigration and citizenship, the expansion of social programs to minorities, and restrictions on firearms ownership and use. And what you had then was you had a change in the Department of Homeland Security to focus on a lot of people that would be, you would consider them to be conservative and Christians. And there was no taking out of context what was said. And this is what we put up with. The president who 5 days before the election said, Obama, we are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. 6 weeks into his administration, this report comes out. I've played you clip after clip of Hillary Clinton, of Barack Obama, and other people saying, hey, you know, you just got to change people's minds. They just can't believe this way. They'll eventually get along with it. There was a conference this past weekend. I can only imagine what they talked about. I haven't had a chance to download it, but the people who I would put on the emerging side of, they claim to be Christians, it was called Evolving Faith. Now, what do you think they were talking about there? Do you think they were talking about 2 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 4, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2? I don't think so. Do you think this group that's running around the country doing this bus tour to the common good, Doug Padgett, Brian McLaren, and others, that they're about those passages of the Bible? No, they're about a left-wing ideology. It has real-life consequences, my friends. See the middle headline there in the Wall Street Journal the other day? Woman who insulted Islam loses in Europe court. A lady in 2009, a professor, I cannot remember her name, on Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, Katie Hopkins did a segment on it on Friday, so you can find it at Secure Freedom Radio podcast. She talked about this person who was a professor who had studied Islam extensively, who did a presentation hours long, and during the presentation she noted that what Islam teaches is that Muhammad, when he was in his 50s, had married a 6-year-old girl and consummated the marriage when he was 9. And she asked a question, what does that make him? And she suggested the answer, and for that she was charged with a hate crime. The case was originally dismissed. It was appealed, ended up this past week in Strasbourg before the European Court, High Court, or whatever they call it, of Human Rights, who said, yes, that is a hate crime because you need to check with the people who might be offended by it. Their offense at what you say about their religion trumps your right of free expression. People like Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, and others, they're even concerned, and Katie mentioned in her interview with Frank, the question came up, are you afraid, Katie, if you leave Great Britain, that you might not be allowed back in because of what you've said? And she says, yes, this is everybody who's fighting these issues is concerned about that. And this is where we are. This is consistent with the policies pushed by Hillary Clinton when she was at the UN to adopt speech codes that were advocated by the Organization of Islamic Countries. By the way, someone once said, I'm familiar with all 57 states. You might remember there are 57 states in the Organization of Islamic Countries. I will note that fact for the record. You're free to draw your own conclusions from that. I was going to talk a little bit this week about Christ at the checkpoint and some things that were discussed there, but let me just, I'm going to skip over, I'm going to wait till I get a little better audio and video of some of the sessions. They could have used our setup because it would have made everything much better. They just had somebody with their iPhone in the back of the room on a tripod. And so the audio is a little bit garbled at times. But the overarching theme of that was that Christian Zionism is bad. If Christians support Israel, that's bad. And Jews are bad. I actually have on my phone a picture of a slide that I took, and they talked about where's all this coming from? And then they put up a picture of, look at all the Jews with all the money supporting Donald Trump, essentially is what they said. If you want to see it afterwards, you can come up and see me. Or look up Dexter Van Zyle's Twitter feed, and you'll see the slide in there. Sheldon Adelson, Jared Kushner, others. Of course, we know that that's who's supporting this hatred known as Donald Trump. They were against Zionism of all kinds. Jews run things, the occupation. And as I said, a lot of what I heard and saw in my discussions with people was based on the fact that they run on emotions and not facts. And look, those refugee camps where people have been living for 70 years, they're terrible. It's not too dissimilar from Honduras and Guatemala. These are not great places to live. But we also do have laws and rules to follow. And I'll talk about the immigration thing, but it's conferences like Christ at the Checkpoint that fuels Jew hatred. They will deny it, but it does. If you sit there, immediately we'll go, oh, look at the occupation and the genocide and apartheid of Israel. And then you see Arab populations growing in Israel. That's genocide? If it is, they're not very good at it. They're not doing that. It's called defending yourself. But these ideas have consequences. And yesterday in Squirrel Hill, in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life Synagogue, a horribly evil person went in shouting, "Jews must die," killed 11 people at that synagogue, several still injured, and it was headlines everywhere. New York Times, Washington Post, even almost the whole front page of this morning's The Plain Dealer in Cleveland, the Columbus Dispatch, everywhere you looked. Now, I know a little bit about that. If you look to the right there, you see Homewood Cemetery, Dallas Avenue. I mean, I know exactly where that is. You see Frick Park down here. You look on the other side of Frick Park, about 3/4 of a mile away or so from where this occurred. That's where my mother grew up. My grandfather lived, and my grandparents and a lot of great aunts and uncles and their family are buried in Homewood Cemetery. And so it hit, I mean, I know exactly where I've seen this synagogue. I know exactly where it is. The worst attack on Jews in American history on one day. In America, 2018. What was even more shocking, though, was some of the Twitter statements, tweets from people about what happened. The president condemned it, of course. His daughter is converted to Judaism. Her husband's an Orthodox Jew. The children, his grandchildren are Jewish. But here is a Jewish writer. She's a writer for GQ magazine, and she said this: "And a word to my fellow American Jews. This president makes this possible here, where you live. I hope the embassy move over there where you don't live was worth it." And so what the media thing was all week long, before this, when we were talking about the bomber. Now, I'm going to say something, I don't know if they caught the guy. I'm skeptical. I use the mail. I have an attorney upstairs for me who wants, I send everything by email when I communicate with attorneys. So they get it right away. This attorney insists on mailing it to me. The attorney is about 6 floors above me. And I'm like, just throw it out the elevator door on the way down. But I get these stuff mailed to me, and 6 floors take 6 days. Sometimes. Sometimes it's 7 or 8. When they did the rules of procedure, they gave you extra time. They gave you 3 extra days for things delivered by mail. And I'm now convinced that was optimistic. So my question was on this bombing thing, all these things sent from South Florida, 13 packages, 13 out of 13 arrived at their destinations from New York to California within 2 days for less than $3 postage with no canceled stamps, at least that I've seen. It just doesn't seem, it doesn't pass the smell test with me. But I'm not sure this guy is, this was a plant of the left or people, that would be on the Republican side that don't like Donald Trump either. But what was the narrative immediately? This is all Donald Trump's fault. All Donald Trump's fault. And he condemned it, and it's like, that's not good enough. It's still his fault. And you could watch the meltdown. This is from Syria, Partisan Girl. People attack synagogues, make the world unsafe for Jews, and make the world unsafe for Jews are part of the problem. And then why? Because they help Zionists like Netanyahu with talking points to get Jews to move to Israel. That's how he used the last terrorist attack in Paris. And so that's the big issue, is getting Jews moving to Israel. And I see people, when I say that I guess I would identify as a Zionist, I know that the Jews are not saved, folks. I'm not that stupid. I know exactly what's going on. I do see a promise in Scripture about a revival of Israel in the end times. One of the ways that happens, though, if they survive. And so I don't want to, these people, you support these evil people. Look, I support a lot of evil people staying alive until they can come to faith in Jesus Christ. But the other thing is that, I'll talk about this in a minute. This article in the New Wire, Divided We Fail, talking about the effects of social media, artificial intelligence, how China's developing it, and their conclusion, and there's been a lot of articles recently about this in The Atlantic, in Wired, and other publications, saying, where's this going? Where's this whole artificial intelligence thing going? And the conclusion almost universally is, we have a really big problem. I'll talk more about this in the future, but this one says, look, a lot of people say artificial intelligence is the solution. I'm not so sure. It's probably more, and this article concludes, says it's going to be more likely a tool of an authoritarian. Now, I bring this up because a lot of times what I talk about, we have our views of the end. Everybody has their view of the end times. And I survey a lot of Facebook groups where it's discussed. I have my views. And apparently a lot of people have different views than I do, because what I find is that almost nobody agrees on everything. And everybody's pretty sure that they're the one that's right. So I'm sort of take the position, look, I have my views. I hope it works out a certain way. It's a future event. Daniel tells us in the end there will be wise people who will understand what's going on. And boy, I sure hope that that's true, because there are a lot of people that really don't understand what's going on. So I would just encourage everybody to kind of, dial it back a bit on these. And look, I'm guilty. I plead guilty. I get passionate about it sometimes. I get passionate about it a lot of the times, but we all need to remember that sometimes there are non-Christians that are watching a in-house battle that they can get pretty ugly. But we know that one of these things is, we have all this talk about the mark of the beast, the Antichrist, what he's going to do, and the things that he's going to do. I see artificial intelligence coming. In the Atlantic article, and again, I'll try to cover this in the future, it talked about quantum computing. Computers are on the verge of becoming so powerful that they will almost be able to instantaneously overcome any encryption that's been set up across the internet and financial sites and everything almost instantaneously. I don't know how this is all going to work out. It is very scary. Having been through credit cards being hacked and that type of thing, it can make your life a little bit chaotic for a period of time. And you think you have everything figured out, and then you get to the rental car place in Dallas and they tell you that, well, yeah, we gave you this new credit card, but we put a zero balance on it. And we have to call your wife to see if, she intended it. And she didn't, but it happens. The media changes everything. They are, this was in the Washington Post. Now, this was with that Khashoggi murder. Horrible thing that was done. But this is what the Washington Post, this is a front page article in the Washington Post. Trump's Hill allies quietly fuel campaign to smear Khashoggi. And there was a whole page ad in the Washington Post this morning remembering our dear friend Jamal Khashoggi. Now, I've pointed out, and I think the evidence is overwhelming, Khashoggi was not a good guy. He was a radical Islamist, pro-Muslim Brotherhood, associated with Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. He was a tool of the Saudi regime for a while till he fell out with them. Now, if you say that, so he says, oh, so you think it was okay that Khashoggi got dismembered and murdered and everything? And no, I didn't say that. Please, people, stop putting words in other people's mouths. I'm just talking about the fact, here's what's happening though. A bad guy is being turned into a saint to hurt somebody else. And to affect our relationship with Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they want to pump up the relationship with Iran. By the way, I'm going to go till I'm done today. Where I collapse. Or I really want some of that desserts we had, the health food we had between services, the Texas sheet cake and that type of thing. So So the Saudis came out. They said the killing was probably premeditated. Here's another thing going on. This is what happened in the Israel. Excuse me here. What we did was we moved our embassy to Jerusalem. And if you go to Israel, there used to be a consulate in East Jerusalem, not too far from the Garden Tomb. This week that was closed, and it merged. It was just, we're going to use the embassy. And of course the Palestinians, that's Ramallah, the capital, where the Palestinian capital is of a non-state, where they have their government offices, they are upset. What does this mean? Dan Shapiro, who's been involved in the Middle East peace process for some time, said that this hints that when Trump comes out with a peace plan, whatever that is, it's going to be a one-state solution. There were articles all over the place about peace plan. Trump, here's one from Times of Israel. Trump said to question Netanyahu, commitment to peace, threatens to get tough. Jared Kushner, Trump not constrained by old ways of thinking. Kushner, reasonable Palestinians will back the peace plan. Even Emmanuel Macron got into the act saying, hey, I've got one too. I'm going to have a peace plan. Now the word is it may come out this week. Here is Jared Kushner interviewed, I'll just play a very brief part of this, on CNN by Van Jones.
Prisons. We did the Middle East. Well, actually, we did Saudi Arabia. How are we going to get peace in the Middle East? By the way.
So this is, I think we've made a lot of progress, and you know, the president's done a very good job of not allowing the old ways of thinking to constrain his actions, not just in the Middle East, but even here at home, and the way he's dealt with a lot of the issues. So what we did when we got to the Middle East, I did the same approach, which basically was to go out and talk to people and to understand kind of, you know, what had been thought of, you know, what the situation is today. I spoke to a lot of the people in the region. I spoke to the past negotiators. And what I realized very quickly was that, is that we've been fighting about the same thing for the last 25 years in the conflict, but we haven't, but not a lot's changed. And so what we did is we took an approach where we thought we would create a very in-depth document that goes through the issues, and we thought something much more prescriptive. I've always found that with conflicts, when I was in business, when you're fighting over a concept, it's much easier to disagree than when you're fighting about specifics. And that's actually a big part of how we got to the finish line on the USMCA, is that we got people to really go into the granular details. And I think that we're hopeful that on the same we can at least isolate where the disagreements really are, and then see if we can make progress. I think that what we'll put forward will hopefully be something that people realize there's a lot more reasons to be for it than reasons to be against it. And I think that there's a bigger gap between the negotiators than there is between the people. I think the people want to have a better life. They want to have better opportunity. And I think that
Well, so he, let's see here.
what we're working on will allow.
Okay, I'm just trying to get my...
both the Israelis to have the security they want, and to allow the Palestinian people to have the opportunity they want, while respecting a lot of the bigger issues.
Well, another thing that happened this week was that in 1994, Israel entered into a peace agreement with Jordan. As part of that, there were certain land swaps that took place. One of those land swaps was a place, there was one down in the southern part of Israel near Eilat, and then this one up here, the Island of Peace, it's just south of the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. And these squiggly lines that you see going through there, that's the Jordan River coming down through there. That's the border between Jordan and Israel. And so this was leased to Israel for 25 years. The lease expires in 2019, and Jordan gave notice this week that we're not going to renew the lease. Now, I think between the two parcels of property, there's been Israelis have been farming this. In the meantime, it's called the Island of Peace. It is, it's about 1,800 acres Jordan's not going to renew the lease on these. Now, Israel's going to fight about it. Does this mean that the peace agreement between Jordan and Israel is over? I don't think so, but it's indicative of the fact that whatever agreements I believe Israel has with its neighbors are always a bit tenuous and subject to change. Right now they have good relationships with Saudi Arabia, with Jordan, so okay relationship with Jordan, Egypt, but these things can change. Going gave back a lot of land. After the 67 war, they had the entire Sinai Peninsula. The land there covered, I'm going to guess, 3 times the existing state of Israel in square kilometers or square meters or acres. And they gave it back to Egypt when they entered into the peace agreement that was brokered by Jimmy Carter with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Caroline Glick has a good article this week titled, "What Was Rabin's Legacy?" And the reason I bring this up is because this is the anniversary, the time when they remember the anniversary of Rabin's death. By the way, at the Island of Peace, you might remember a number of years ago, a Jordanian individual shot and killed 7 young Israeli schoolgirls. This happened, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was certainly less than 20 years ago, and he's already been released from prison in Jordan, by the way. So what was Rabin's legacy? So here, just look at a little bit of what Caroline says here. This week we received a few reminders that certain significant ways, the discourse in Israel, and I also want you to look at the parallels between what's going on in Israel and what goes on in the United States, because I'm always stunned. It seems like it's the same thing in Israel as the same thing here, the way people are talking to each other or talking past each other in the political spectrum. This week we received a few reminders that in certain significant ways, the discourse in Israel and hence the policy making is very much stuck in the 1990s. The first reminder came on Sunday when Jordan's King Abdullah abruptly announced that he is rescinding 2 annexes of the peace deal that then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed with his father, the late King Hussein, in 1994. Not only did he give Israel no prior warning of his plan to abrogate the annexes, but Abdullah made the announcement on the 23rd anniversary of Rabin's assassination. Iran on Jordan's borders with Syria and Iraq, or what we used to call Syria and Iraq. So she notes, though, look, nothing's going to happen because it's in our interest to support the Jordanian king, monarchy. So the second reminder came Wednesday with Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas's renewed threat to abrogate the Oslo Accords and his predecessor Yasser Arafat, that he and his predecessor Yasser Arafat concluded with Israel in the framework of the peace process they embarked upon in 1993. It's not at all clear why Israel should care if Abbas abrogates the deals. Since they were signed, the Palestinians have only upheld the sections that serve their interest. They cooperate with Israel against Hamas because they are threatened by Hamas. They don't condemn terrorism, and indeed they engage in terrorism because they support terrorism against Israel. The Palestinians never stopped, and indeed they constantly escalate their incitement against Israel because they think that doing so advances their interests. In fact, in another article in the Jerusalem Post this week, Itamar Marcus, who runs Palestinian Media Watch, noted that the Palestinian lady who blew up a bus full of Israeli schoolchildren, I think 20 some were killed, is lauded as a hero in Palestinian schools to this day, as a great example. So Abbas had this, he says, we're going to withdraw from Oslo. The other thing she knows, she goes this, but whereas Israel has few options for retaliating against Abdullah, with regards to Abbas, Israel has plenty of options for dealing with his threats and for responding if he does finally make good on his tired threat to abrogate the Oslo Accords. Moreover, these options have been available to Israel for at least 18 years. Abbas's predecessor, Arafat, effectively abrogated the agreements 18 years ago when he rejected then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak's offer of peace and statehood at the Camp David summit in July 2000. Believe me, when this Trump plan, if it's ever released, when it comes out, they're going to be trotting out all the videos of Bill Clinton trying to get Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat to agree at the Camp David Accords shortly before his term ended in 2000. Just be prepared. Keep the clicker in your hand so you can switch the stations if it makes you uncomfortable. Why has Israel not exercised, she says, its option to act unilaterally to secure its strategic and national interests in Judea and Samaria in light of the Palestinians' self-evident bad faith? Why is Israel's strategic discourse in relation to the Palestinians stuck in the 1990s? We received a clear answer to that question on Sunday during the official memorial ceremony for Yitzhak Rabin at Mount Herzl Military Cemetery. Rabin's granddaughter, Noah Rothman, used the official event to launch a diatribe against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and oddly enough, against me. Now, there's no audio on this. This is the granddaughter of Yitzhak Rabin speaking at Mount Herzl Cemetery during the memorial service. And Benjamin Netanyahu was sitting right there. And she went off, she's a person of the left, and she went off on Benjamin Netanyahu. You don't care, you don't understand, you don't want to have peace, etc. And she also, by extension, attacked Caroline Glick, who, by the way, if my memory is correct, actually served on the negotiating team for the Oslo Accords and has some very laudatory things to say about Yitzhak Rabin. Not so much about Shimon Peres, who was the chief negotiator and essentially, she said, shoved Rabin into a corner on Oslo politically and geopolitically, and eventually it led to his assassination. But she's very complimentary in many respects to Yitzhak Rabin and his concern and love for Israel and how he was not going to do this. And there you see Benjamin Netanyahu sitting there being castigated by this person at her grandfather's grave. Caroline says, without a shred of evidence, and indeed with the daily news of the criminal probes against Netanyahu, the media's hatred for him and its support for the EU-funded radical left, and in the face of the Supreme Court's growing penchant for overthrowing laws and government policies without any significant legal basis for its actions, sound familiar? Rothman said, quote, the problem is that in our country these days, doubting is akin to treason. Criticism is taken as pettiness, and a demand for setting an example is construed as political persecution. She then attacked Netanyahu for not following the policy positions of the left. In her words, quote, when did one of the nation's leaders in these times give legitimacy to a dissenting voice? God forbid. Not as part of a cynical political debate, but honestly in the name of pluralism, which is so vital to democracy, to our very existence, to our future. Then she got to the part about me. Rothman accused an unnamed spokeswoman at the Prime Minister's office of tweeting a photograph of Rabin shaking Arafat's hand at the White House with a caption accusing Rabin of treason. And so what Caroline points out is that, look, our discourse here has gotten so toxic and so bad, I don't even know why we're talking about peace. We can't even get along. And this brings us to the real reason why Israel's discourse and through it, its policies are stuck in the 90s. After Rabin was murdered, Israel's political left, including the media, moved to demonize the entire political right, accusing it of inciting Rabin's murder. Does this sound familiar? The clear purpose of the demonization was to make it impossible to criticize the Oslo process, Or you could insert there, when she says Oslo process, the Iran nuclear deal, which had already been largely discredited by the suicide bombings which commenced just months after the initial deal was signed at the White House. Following the assassination, every statement of criticism for the peace process was immediately attacked as a support for Rabin's assassin. Just like the person who said, oh, you attacked Khashoggi, you support his assassination. They're two different things. Try to think on like more than, the 1 inch level. Things are a little bit deeper than that. So she goes on to praise. It's in the Friday Jerusalem Post. Get this way. She concludes with this: Rabin's actual vision tells us something important about how the left's draconian restrictions on freedom of speech have harmed Israel. By shunting aside what Rabin actually stood for and reinventing him as a leftist ideologue, the left has cheapened and distorted the true significance of what he stood for while preventing Israel from correcting his mistakes and building on his successes. And we see this happen on every level here in our country as well. If you say, I'm concerned about this caravan and the immigration, by the way, it's who knows how many people it is, 7,000, 14,000. Do you know that last month in September, the border control people detained or removed 41,000 people trying to enter the United States? And the month before that, it was 37,000. Now, so what that means is what you got coming is a week's worth of what border control deals with. But if you say anything like, boy, there are bad people embedded in there. They're MS-13. And Sarah Carter has done some of the best journalistic work on this. She speaks Spanish. She's been down there. She's been talking to the leaders of Guatemala and Honduras. And another guy, he was interviewed on Frank Gaffney's thing the other day. Let's see. It is, and of course it's not going to come up on my, I hate the way, Twitter, why don't you just take me back to where I was? I think his name is Art Geddes. He's done a lot of research on it. This is all being funded by Marxist leftist groups that are associated with Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. I'm not saying that everybody that's coming through this process involved in this caravan is a terrorist. Don't put words in my mouth. But there are bad people involved. We know that in these usual situations, people trying to get through Mexico to the United States, somewhere between 40% and 80% of all the women are raped. Do you care about that? You people who judge people who are concerned about this whole process, do you care about that? 20% of the boys are raped. My view is, look, if they have a right to asylum, we'll give them asylum under our law. But if bad people get through, the blood of everyone that they kill or hurt or maim or rape or whatever is on your head. But the people that the virtue signaling left about how good we are because we just want to let everybody in, they'll never acknowledge the problem. So this is a very interesting thing. So this is what Caroline said. I think you would highly recommend it. Another article yesterday, Supremacy in the Muslim World. On October, about 2 weeks ago, it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, Prime Minister Erdogan said, with its accreditation, let me back that up. With its accreditation of history, geographical location, and cultural wealth, Turkey has hosted diverse faiths in peace for centuries and is the only country that can lead the Muslim world. Now, I don't have time to go into all the Bible prophecy things, but in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, there is no doubt that Turkey is a major player in that. The clever nature, the clever things that this man has done to accede to almost absolute power in Turkey has been pretty shocking. This article, though, has a very good historical analysis of what happened in between Turkey and Saudi Arabia in the past, or what we now know as Saudi Arabia. For many years, for 4 centuries, the Muslim holy sites in Mecca and Medina were controlled by the Ottoman Empire, based in Turkey, in Istanbul. There were many wars fought to try to wrest control of the Arabian Peninsula away from the Ottoman Turks. This is what the Wall Street Journal says yesterday in this big article. The long struggle for supremacy in the Muslim world. And this is very important. In the fall of 1818, that would be 200 years ago, the Saudi monarch was brought to Istanbul in chains. He was displayed in a cage to the cheering crowds outside the Hagia Sophia Mosque, and then celebratory fireworks, and then amid celebratory fireworks, his head was chopped off. It was actually, he was then hung on a post, and his head was put under his arm for 3 days, so everyone could see. This gruesome episode in the shared history of Turkey and Saudi Arabia hasn't been mentioned in public, as the two countries have clashed over the October 2nd killing of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. But the long legacy of rivalry between the two Sunni Muslim powers, both of them key American allies, has fueled Turkish President Erdogan's determination to punish the House of Saud for Khashoggi's death. And as I noted, in the wake of Khashoggi's killing, Erdogan proclaimed that Turkey is the only country that can lead the Muslim world. Turkey is the main reason that the previous 2 Saudi states ceased to exist. The first disappeared when the Ottoman Expeditionary Corps, comprised mostly of Turkish and Albanian soldiers, seized the Saudi capital of Denia on the outskirts of Riyadh on September 11th, 1818, 9/11. The city was razed. Stuff like that just happens way too often. The city was razed. According to a Russian diplomatic dispatch, the Turkish Sultan then had the captured Saudi ruler Abdullah bin Saud escorted to Istanbul alongside the chief Wahhabi cleric. After the deposed Saudi monarch was beheaded outside the Hagia Sophia, his body was propped up in public for 3 days with his severed head under his arm. As for the Wahhabi Imam, he was sent to Istanbul's bazaar for beheading. In Ottoman eyes, the Saudis were bloodthirsty murderers who had plundered the holy city of Karbala in Ottoman Iraq, slaughtering 4,000 civilian inhabitants, most of them Shiite, and later destroyed many shrines in Mecca and Medina. To celebrate the demise of the Saudi state and the liberation of the 2 holy mosques, the Ottoman Sultan even released debtors from jail across his realm. Another fight took place in the 1870s, and the Ottomans defeated the Saudis at that time. But this destruction that the Saudis do is what they do. For example, this is a picture of the Great Mosque in Mecca in 1889, about 130 years ago. It does not look like that today. The Ayyad fortress that you see on the hill, on the mountain behind the mosque, had been built by the Ottomans and existed for a long time, but about 2003, this mosque was completely destroyed as the mountain was leveled. You see the little red dot there to the left of this giant clock tower? That was raised. It was in the area of the clock tower. This building that they raised, they expanded the mosque to accommodate more worshipers. They're currently expanding the mosque even more to accommodate another 1.6 or 1.8 million worshipers at one time. In addition, right now it'll accommodate somewhere around, I believe, 3 or 4 million people at once. It's a huge tourist, but what the Saudis have done is they went in and they destroyed the Ottoman fortress. They destroyed a lot of grave sites and of people associated with the Prophet Muhammad because of their sect, and they put up this clock tower. The expansion of the mosque that took place, why is that not showing up? That's weird. The expansion of the mosque that took place, oh, there it is, $18.7 billion back in 2003. By the way, the contractor for that was the father of Osama bin Laden. This clock tower was done for $15 billion. Opened a few years ago. It's the third largest building, tallest building on planet Earth today. The clock there is 6 times the size of Big Ben. And they destroyed a lot of Muslim historical sites to put that up there. In fact, many people compare what the Saudi family, royal family, has done to what the Taliban did when they destroyed some of those old ancient Buddha statues in Afghanistan a number of years ago. Also remember, this is from a slide that I had in my presentation back in March of this year. The new Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said the contemporary triangle of evil comprises Iran, Turkey, and extremist religious groups. So there is this conflict between Iran and Turkey. There's this conflict between Iran and Turkey over the over who's going to control the Sunni Muslim world. Do not know how this is going to come out. Thanks to the Khashoggi affair, the Wall Street Journal said yesterday, however, Mr. Erdogan's Turkey can finally credibly claim that the moral high ground, a major boon for Ankara's regional ambitions. One of the astonishing ironies of the entire episode is how the leading jailer of journalists in the world is now a paragon of press freedom and protections, said Stephen Cook, a senior fellow at Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington. Not only that, but Turkey, which has been a wholly irresponsible actor on Iran, Syria, Middle East peace, even stability in the Horn of Africa, now looks like a source of great regional stability in comparison to the reckless Saudis. Now, a lot of that is made up. One of the other interesting things that happened in the Middle East this week was that Prime Minister Netanyahu went to Oman. Oman sits in a very strategic position along the Indian Ocean, but there where you see the United Arab Emirates, there's a little part of the far north peninsula that really is one of the most strategic parts to control the Straits of Hormuz, through which about 30% of the world's oil flows and gets to market. And land is controlled by Oman. And so what Netanyahu did was he went to Oman yesterday. He's the first Israeli leader to do this in about 20 or 25 years. And part of this is, a lot of people are, what does this mean? Why are they having this meeting? Why did Oman allow Netanyahu to come and then publicize it? A lot of these videos and everything were put up by people in Oman. So there's a lot of question about what it is or why it's happening. A lot of people think that this is happening because this is somehow related to making things difficult for Iran or shoring up alliances to fight Iran, and to have somebody there that is an ally that can control the Straits of Hormuz or prevent Iran from taking control of the Straits of Hormuz, which would be an economic disaster for the world. At the same time this is happening, yesterday in Istanbul, there was a summit, Erdogan of Turkey, Merkel of Germany, Putin of Russia, and Macron of France, to discuss peace in Syria, particularly in Idlib. They're in a place overlooking the Bosporus. You can see one of the giant bridges over the Bosporus there in the background. And so they're trying to find, how do we solve the thing with Idlib? This does have prophetic implications. Iran was not involved, but two of the major players that I think are involved in Ezekiel 38 and 39 were there. But the question is, their interests don't align. Everybody has different interests. Erdogan has been, excuse me, very, very clever in the way that he has played this. It has been an amazing thing to watch. So pay attention to what's going on there. But I think what you're seeing is the rise of Turkey. Turkey has put themselves in a very, despite their economic problems, they are in a pretty solid strategic position. Erdogan's goal is to make Turkey one of the 10 largest economies in the world. It ranks right now 17th. He is doing all kinds of projects. He has Turkish engineers involved in projects all over the world. In fact, an engineering report that I reviewed yesterday, the participation of a country's engineers in projects outside the country is ranked each year. Right now, and for many years now, for probably a decade, the leading country in having their engineers working elsewhere around the world has been China. But for that same decade, the United States has been third, and second, though, has been Turkey. Turkey has massive building projects underway. There's talk of building a canal from the Black Sea down to the Mediterranean on the European side of the Bosporus. That will cost billions. That project is either started or soon to start. Erdogan is currently building what will be, when it's finished, the largest airport on planet Earth. You should also know that Turkey controls, water is king in the Middle East. Oil is very important, but water is king. You cannot live without water. Turkey currently has, on a per capita basis, 10 times the water resources of any other Arab country in the desert regions of the Middle East. 10 times per person. 10 times the amount per person. Turkey controls 90% of the water that flows into the Euphrates River. 90%. They have constructed in the Euphrates and Tigris, in the Tigris River, they control 45%. That means they control what's going to happen in Iraq and Syria and Jordan, largely with regard to water, but mainly Syria and Iraq. Erdogan wants to expand his influence. They've issued maps in Turkey about that. Very important to watch this. There was some discussion about this with the leader prior to Erdogan about oil and water, and he said, fine, drink your oil if you get thirsty. Come to us if you need water. They've constructed in the Euphrates and Tigris River basins 600 dams. There are plans to construct another 600 dams to control the water even further. In fact, when they construct dams in flood areas, it's done largely to prevent Kurds and other rebel groups from being able to easily travel from one group to the next. It's a strategic thing. I'm telling you, they've been very clever. The other thing that happened yesterday was in Bahrain, was the Mamana dialogue. One of the speakers there was Secretary of Defense Mattis. He covered a few key points. One thing that he said in his speech was, Iran is a excuse me. Iran is a threat, but its threat is in very large, its conventional weapons. And what you're seeing is an increase in the number of missile attacks that Iran is engaged in right now. Second point he said, or he noted, was the complicity of Iran and Russia in keeping Assad in power, and by doing so, the burdens of refugees on surrounding countries. 3 million refugees from Syria in Turkey. By the way, all of the Arab people that fall out of favor with their countries are ending up in Istanbul. Istanbul is becoming very Arab in its orientation. Erdogan is taking advantage of that, and he's a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's why Khashoggi was there. And Mattis said that moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and the closure of the consulate in East Jerusalem will not have an impact on the peace process. But as one person there noted, people in the audience did not believe it. In fact, here's one exchange with an audience member.
A quick comment and a question. I have to say I take issue with your explanation that moving the embassy to Jerusalem does not affect the message about your commitment to the Middle East peace process, especially that you also close the consulate in East Jerusalem and move that to your embassy.
The hate crimes, it's almost like we're losing our fundamental friendliness toward one another as people. We're losing a sense of common shared destiny on this planet. And why people are becoming more tribal, why this is becoming manifested in religious terms, I understand why you would take issue with my point about the move of our embassy. And I understand it. I would just say, if you watch our actions, that is not a singular action. Watch our other actions as we try to, once again, do what President Clinton tried so hard to do and nearly succeeded. Remind everyone that when Yasser Arafat walked away, that was probably the closest we had been. We have seen the king of Saudi Arabia back in the early 2000s come up with his peace plan. We know that if people of goodwill will work together, that this can go forward. The Palestinian people need this, and we support, and President Trump supports that effort.
Okay, just two more quick articles and we'll be done here. There were attacks in Gaza over the past 48 hours. It is now, there's a very excellent article at Ynet called "Iran is Pressuring U.S. Using Islamic Jihad in Gaza." A lot of the rockets that were, in fact, as I was getting ready to prepare some things, my red alert app started going off. It's sort of like, okay, what else is going to happen before I get this thing finished for Sunday? And so there were these attacks. It appears that this has come from Islamic Jihad. I would recommend that you read the article. It is an excellent analysis of how Iran is using things in Gaza. They really don't have a good relationship with Hamas. Hamas is working with Egypt. Iran wants to be involved. They want to keep the Israelis back on their heels because they're afraid of what's going to happen when this Trump peace plan comes out. So they're pushing Islamic Jihad to do this. And the people from Islamic Jihad, their calculus is, look, Israel never comes in here and wipes everybody out. So let's just go ahead and throw our rockets in there from time to time. We'll storm the border fence. Yeah, a few people will be killed, but, you know, we're getting money and everything from Iran and some weapons and supplies and that sort of thing. And we're also keeping Israel back on their heels, because part of this is to keep Israel occupied in southern Israel for what I think will be a major problem in northern Israel coming up. Wall Street Journal this morning, as Israel targets Iran and Syria, U.S. officials warn of reprisals. Just two paragraphs. Israel has been conducting an aggressive military campaign across Syria against Iran-backed militia groups, an effort that has been encouraged by the White House but aroused the concern of many U.S. military officials. While the White House has applauded Israel's assertiveness against Iran inside Syria, the military officials say they fear it could backfire if Iran's belief that the U.S. is behind many of the strikes prompts Iran-backed groups to attack American troops in Syria or Iraq. It's a growing concern for us. And in fact, here is this, I think, really one of the better graphics that I've seen. This is of course, this is the Sea of Galilee. This kind of shows you the geography. You can see the elevation change up here to the Golan Heights all the way up here to Mount Hermon. This is the high ground. This is what you would want on a military basis. And I do have a couple more articles. I apologize. I just have got to at least touch on them. While this is going on, there is a lot of concern that Iran has, through our southern border and immigration and that sort of thing, has caused a lot of people that are associated with them to come into the United States, to maybe engage in attacks if things get bad. So people need to be aware that this is a possibility. A lot of people are talking about it. At the same time, there is China has these hidden camps, and I'm not sure why is there a reason why my slides aren't advancing? What's that? Okay, so, well, I'll tell you what, I'll talk about them next week. China is oppressing the Uyghurs, the Muslims. They've constructed these enormous military camps in Western China. And I'll have to leave the other one for this. So, look, there's a lot of things going on in the world. A lot of it lines up with Bible prophecy. It is turbulent. It's on politics. It's on religion. It's on social issues. It's just on everything. And don't worry about it. Share the gospel. Tell people, look, if you think things are spinning out of control, they're not spinning out of control. This is exactly what the Bible prophesied was going to happen, but everybody needs to get right with the Lord. The only way is to be saved is by grace through faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross for all time. That's it. And so take opportunities to share with those people the things that are happening. So let's pray, and we'll talk about the China next week, and also some very troubling things. If you want to do a little bit of homework, I would recommend that you go to Center for Security Policy and look up an article that they put out called Pearl Harbor 2.0. It's very troubling about some of the things that China and Russia are planning in terms of placement of military devices around the world, including the United States, in these big containers. And I have some videos of what they're doing. It's positively, it's concerning. It's very concerning. So let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for the guidance that you give us. Lord, I just pray that you will always keep us focused on you, knowing that you are the author and finisher of our faith and the soon returning King. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.